So get ready to play with the Roland. This is a fully patchable, fully modular synthesizer, so it's a little bit more complex than something that is semi-modular, and you only have to use one or two patch cables. So what I want to do start off with, first off, is I'm just going to unplug everything, and I'm going to walk you through how to get everything plugged in if you want to start from scratch. We're going to assume that we're going to leave everything plugged um, in a simple configuration, but you should feel free to explore and try different patching techniques and explore, because that's part of the fun of using a modular synthesizer, is using all of these different kind of techniques. So first off, our output of our Roland actually comes out the back. There's two output jacks right here that get routed directly to this 1/4" jack on the back that goes directly into the mixer. So you're going to have to make sure that the channel on the mixer is turned up. You have to make sure this blue cable is plugged in, and then you can plug whatever you want to send to the mixer into these two jacks. And they both get summed together. So it's like a little tiny mixer with no level controls right here. We have our synthesizer right here. We also have a sequencer right here. This is a really fun sequencer, and it's kind of deep. It's deceptively deep, actually. First of all, you have to turn it on, so there's a little power button there, so it doesn't come on by itself automatically. And then the first thing you have to do is you have to plug the sequencer into your synthesizer. So like all sequencers, it has CV out for the pitch and gate out for the rhythm. I'm going to just grab a short patch cable and plug CVA out into our key input. So our pitch input of our oscillator is called key. Notice that we have two keys because we have two oscillators. Similarly, we have two filters, which also both have a key input, interestingly, which suggests that we could maybe plug volt per octave control into the filter as well as the oscillator. So if we wanted to, for example, turn the resonance all the way up to make a sine wave, we could control that sine wave with our volt per octave signal from our sequencer. I'm not going to do that right now. So our key input, CV input, comes into the key right there, and then our gate output is going to come out here, and we're going to use that to trigger our envelopes. Now, because we're going to want to use that gate signal a couple of times, I'm going to send the gate signal into a mult. So all a multiple does is it takes the signal and just splits it up across all of these jacks. And this is actually two multiples that are kind of gained together. As long as you don't plug anything into, I think it's this jack. As long as you don't plug anything into this jack, these four and these three are all connected. As soon as you plug something in here, it breaks the connection between these two, and all of a sudden you have 5 and 4 separate mults on this. And that's pretty common in mults to split things up in that way. So we're just going to be using the top 5 for now. Actually, we're just using a couple, really. We got our gate signal coming in. We're going to use our gate signal to trigger both of our envelopes. And notice there's a gate little thing right here, right? So that is our gate signal coming in to trigger this envelope, and our gate coming in here to trigger this envelope as well. So now that we've done that, our sequencer is connected. We need to make sure that our beat step is playing. So this is the arterial beat step. All this is functioning as is the sequencer for the Moog Mother 32, but it's also setting the main tempo and clock for everything else on the table. So when you first turn everything on, you actually might need to come in here and hit play, and you'll see the sequencer running on here. And then when you turn this knob, I think you actually have to go into sequencer mode and then hit play. And then you can turn the knob to change the tempo, and you can see it goes faster or slower. And you'll notice over here on the drum machine, you'll see an indication of the tempo right here, which will change when you turn the knob on the beat step. And you'll also see the speed of the sequencer speeding up and slowing down. Once we know that our beat step is playing, we can hit play here, and this will start playing through as well. Notice that in order for this to be synchronized to the key step, or beat step, actually has to have a plug into the sync in jack. If you unplug that, then this just runs on its own. You control the speed of the sequence with the speed knob right here. It's actually really slow for some reason. The speed knob does not have a super wide range. So I like to use it connected, and when you do that, then the speed knob does nothing, right? You can start and stop it, but it stays in sync with the beat step when it started. Okay. I'm going to let you look up more about this Korg SQ1 if you want to. You can just leave it in its default set state if you want to and not mess with it. But if you want to learn a little bit more about it, it's actually pretty deep and pretty fun to play with. So over here, we have our sequencer running, but we don't hear anything yet because we don't have anything plugged into our outputs. The first thing you might want to do is grab a cable and plug our oscillator directly into the output and just see if we're getting any sound at all. So I'm going to turn up the, we're definitely getting input, output. Actually super, super loud, because by default the oscillators are like maximum volume. They're really, really loud. Remember, this is a subtractive synthesizer, so we can only take away energy from our oscillators. Our standard signal flow here might be take a square wave and feed it into our filter. That's too short of a cable. Let's try this one. Take a square wave and feed it into our filter. Take the output of our filter and feed it into our VCA, and then take the output of our VCA and send that into our output here. Okay, so if we're doing that, then as long as the filter frequency is turned up, and as long as the volume knobs for our inputs to our filter and the input to our VCA are turned up, then we should get something coming out of our VCA. There's a reason why we're not right now. Actually, we should be getting something coming out of here. We are getting something coming out of here. I can see that light right there. That light is telling me that we're getting signal out. So if I turn up the mixer, I can hear that signal. There's a lot going on here. So I'm going to try to keep things relatively simple. But let's think about a couple of things. First of all, there is some standards on this module. On the top up here for our VCF and our VCA are mixers. There's a 3-input mixer for the left and the right side of both of these. Remember, this is a dual synthesizer, so there's always 2 channels. So that means that you have to turn up the input volume for anything coming into this input of this module, and the same thing over here. On the bottom, there are CV inputs. So these are the inputs for control signals. So if we want to control something with an envelope, for example, right here, we can take the output of this envelope, send it to the CV input on the bottom here, and then turn that CV level up. And now that CV level is going to control the level of output. Notice there's a little switch here that goes between linear and exponential. I normally keep it on a linear because when you go exponential, you really have to have a super loud signal coming in here to be able to hear anything. So leave it on linear. That's going to work better for you. A lot of little things gotchas for this synth for sure. Okay, so here we have an ADSR. So this is standard ADSR when we have our gate length of our sequencer in the middle. Our sequencer is going on off evenly, right? And so if we turn our release time all the way down, our sustain time all the way down, now we're only hearing the attack is really short, just goes up and then down, and we're hearing the gate length. If I change the gate length, so you can really see the difference in gate lengths right here. So if I turn my sustain up, it doesn't really make any difference because the sustain's really short, right? If I turn my release up, now every time the gate goes low, it takes a little while for that envelope to die down. If we turn our gate to be more of a medium level, you can sort of hear, especially if we turn the speed of this down a little bit. Let's go ahead and do this. So what I'm going to do here is, instead of turning the speed down, I'm just going to disable some steps. There's also a control here for fast and slow envelopes. This is a fast envelope. There's our attack. Okay. So that's really everything with the envelope right here. We have fast and slow control. This is requiring an external trigger. We can also put on cycle mode. In cycle mode, it's just going to run on its own infinitely. Generally, we leave it an external input because it's an envelope. We want to trigger our envelope with our gate signal. We have another gate up here, which we can use for our filter. So I'm going to take the output. By the way, notice the outputs for the envelopes. There's two envelopes because this is a dual, but unlike the left and right, it's on top and bottom, which is a little bit confusing. Also, the outputs have three outputs. There's two outputs, which are regular, and there's one output, which is inverted. So let's go ahead and control our filter and see what this sounds like. Okay, so our filter is turned all the way up right now, so we're not hearing anything, and our CV is turned all the way down, so it's not controlling anything. If I just turn my filter down, you can hear it do what it does, right? Okay. Now I'm going to take my CV, I'm going to start controlling it with the envelope. And notice that you can hear the filter going up and down based on the envelope. Let's see what's going on here. Let's put on fast mode again. Let's turn our resonance up a little bit. That'll make the filter sweep a little bit more prominent. Let's make our amplitude envelope longer. We can hear that filter a little bit more. There's also a high-pass filter on here, which I normally just leave off, but if you want to make it be less of a bassy sound, if you're using like a higher frequency, then that can sort of help it fit into a mix. So that is an envelope controlling the amplitude of our VCA, an envelope controlling the frequency of our filter. Let's take a look over our keyboard over here, or our VCO over here. There's three outputs for three different waveforms. The triangle wave, obviously not going to be very interesting for subtractive synthesis, but actually can be really nice to mix into our mixer. Let me grab a longer cable. Take our triangle wave, send it over here, and then use our sawtooth wave, which is great for subtractive synthesis. And then we can mix in a little bit of our triangle wave to give a little bit more low frequency energy, right? Because the triangle wave we can have only the really low harmonics. Kind of fattens the sound up a little bit. That's a common use for this triangle wave, as well as to use the ring modulator, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay, so three oscillators, you just plug into the output for the one you want. If you're using a square wave, then you can use the pulse width control. Just a standard pulse width control like you'd find elsewhere for square waves. Now, if we wanted to, we could use an LFO, and the middle of our envelope section is an LFO. I'm going to take the sine wave output of our LFO, and then plug it into the PW input to modulate the pulse width, and this controls how much modulation there is. Let's bring our pulse width down by Mach. Let's see. Oh, you know what? These are set to be set to be triggered by the keyboard. Let's put these in the off positions, and that will keep the LFO running all the time. That's a lot of PWM, a lot of pulse width modulation. Here's the frequency, and here is the depth of modulation. Pretty nice, right? Pretty cool. There's a couple of other things going on in here. We can control the pitch, the octave of our oscillator with our octave control, which is actually really helpful to get sort of in the right ballpark. And then this is a fine-tune control, which normally if you leave it in the middle, it should, quote-unquote, should stay in tune. We have a couple of inputs over here besides our key input for our 1 volt per octave signal, which are frequency modulation inputs. So if you wanted to, you could send that LFO here and do pitch vibrato, which is kind of a crazy thing to do. Certainly can be fun for certain things. You could also take the output of one oscillator. Let's see. I'm going to take the triangle wave output of this oscillator, put it in here, and I'm going to frequency modulate this oscillator with this oscillator. This is very different than FM synthesis in the way that we've been talking about it in class. Well, you know, you get some of the same effects. It's a little harder to control for reasons, because the analog synthesizer is never going to be as precise, so getting exact harmonicity ratios is going to be really difficult. Crazy, right? So this is where you get into the world of modular synthesis, because you might say, what if we had this happen every time the note gets triggered to get kind of like a little burst of inharmonicity at the beginning of a note. So we can take the output of our VCO2, send it to our VCA2. We're not using this VCA at all right now on the right-hand side. We're going to take our filter envelope. Whoops, I need a longer cable. Take our filter envelope and use it to control VCA2. And make sure we turn the input mixer up. We definitely don't want the sum. This sum output is both VCAs summed together. So I'm just going to take the output here, which is only this side of the VCA. Same with this out is only this side of the VCA. And then I'm going to grab another cable. And I'm going to route the output of this VCA into my FM input of my oscillator. So now we can get a FM just at the beginning of the note. And then you might have to play around a little bit to figure out how to make it sound the way you want it to sound. And then I'm going to turn up my... There's a little bit of a percussive attack to that note now. I can even... So that's one example of something you could do. I'm going to go ahead and undo that, because I actually want to show you the ring modulator in here, which is really super fun. Okay. So this is a ring modulator. Just like all amplitude modulation, it has a carrier input and a modulator input, and then has an output right here. And this is the amplitude of the modulator input, so it determines how much modulation the modulation applies to the input. So what I can do is I can take my triangle output of oscillator A, our triangle output of oscillator B. If I turn this all the way down, it's turning my oscillator B, our modulator input amplitude to 0, so it turns everything off. And then I can take the output of that and either feed that into my filter or feed that into my VCA if I want to bypass the filter. So let's take a listen to it from the filter first. I'm going to turn down my normal input here. And now we're only listening to the output of this ring modulator, which is oscillator B modulating the amplitude of oscillator A. So quite a bit quieter, but also remember we are using triangle waves. If I were to use, it's a little bit brighter, but actually triangle waves, it makes a little bit more sense because we can get all these harmonics when we start amplitude modulating with a sawtooth or a square wave. Okay, so now the key here is what is the ratio between these two oscillators. By default, oscillator 2 will track the input of oscillator 1. So if we put a key in here, it's like it's connected to this key as well. So these should stay in tune with each other. So if I just tune these so that they're actually kind of in tune, this is the same. This is 2 channels of ring modulation, right? So this is bottom channel we're not using. We're using the top channel. You can change the octaves. Because it's analog, it's very difficult to get it exactly in tune, which is one reason why you might notice that it's a little bit of a warmth or like a detuned sound to it, which is actually really nice. Definitely quite a bit quieter though, right? We're definitely like losing some amplitude through this, which I haven't not really noticed so much before. I'm going to turn up our output volume because we have a lot of room to go. Notice how much we're still sending out a decent level of signal there. If I bring in my main oscillator, boy, we're getting a pretty fat sound now, right? That's nice. I'm liking that a lot. Okay, let's just keep the focus on here, and let's see what happens when we detune it. So we're getting all these inharmonic intervals because these frequencies are now not an integer ratio anymore. Pretty complex and pretty fun, pretty interesting. You can get interesting. Let's go ahead and so sometimes you can get to places that are almost in tune. So that's like, there's a ratio here, but it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, it's like a 3-to-2 ratio. So some notes are really nicely in tune, some notes aren't. If I add more notes to my sequencer, and so play with these a little bit more. Pretty fun. It's also fun. All right. So we're getting a lot of really crazy sounds over here, and we've really only begun to scratch the surface of what's going on here. I'm going to throw one other thought at you, which is this module right here, which is what we call a switched mult. And the idea here is that we have 2 inputs. One input is a regular mult, so you can plug one input here and take a regular output from here. But these 2 inputs, and then we can have 3 outputs, and we can decide what these 3 outputs are listening to. So for example, we could take our triangle wave, put it into one of the inputs. We can take our square wave, plug it into one of the other inputs, and then take the output of one of the outputs and plug it into the input of our modulator. And now using this switch, I can go from triangle wave going into my modulator for the ring modulator, or a square wave. I think it's actually square wave on this side, triangle wave on this side. Let's see what that sounds like. And this is nothing going into the ring modulator, so the ring modulator is off. Pretty cool, huh? And then if I wanted to, I could just take our sawtooth wave and go directly into the filter. And that's just the raw triangle wave coming out of this oscillator 2 going into our filter. Even just a little bit. All right, So that is where we're going to leave this. I'm going to try to leave this exact patch set up. This is something that I've done a bunch of times, so I know how it goes. Feel free to come in here and mess around with this if you want to, and then you can always come back and repatch it like this. We haven't talked at all about the reverb, which is really very simple. You just plug into the input here, and then plug out of the reverb the left mono output into here. And then you, this is the input volume, and this is the mix of the reverb level. And that's the reverb. And then you can mess around with the delay times and everything like that. It's kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about for the assignment. A lot of fun. Have fun with it. Obviously, there's a lot of depth. Make sure you read the manual for this if you want to learn more about that. There are video tutorials about using this, the Roland modules. So take a look at those online. You can also find lots of information about this effects module and this ring modulator if you want to. I'm sure there are videos out there because they're both commercial products. And yeah, have fun.